The following audio is from the Paradox Church in Fort Worth, Texas. To support the mission of the Paradox Church, text your amount to 84321 or visit us online at theparadoxchurch.com/give.
All right, good morning. My name is Jim, one of the pastors here. Good to have you. Last week, we started the book of Nehemiah. That's typically what we do, is just kind of work through a book of the Bible. And so we started last week in this great Old Testament book. So just kind of a quick review of chapter 1. We meet Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a Jewish exile. He's working in Persia as a cupbearer to the king. Think Secret Service agent to the president. Okay, that's that kind of position. He's protecting the king. And his brother comes to visit him and lets him know that the walls of Jerusalem and the city are still in disrepair. That over 100 years before, the Babylonians had sacked Jerusalem, torn down the walls, and it's still in that kind of condition. And Nehemiah is broken over this reality, that this is still happening, that this is still going on, and it kind of hits him in a new way, where maybe things have been broken down in your own life for a long, long time, and for a while you tried to rebuild that wall, but then couldn't, and you've numbed it since, but then something happens, and all of a sudden it hits you in a fresh way. That's what happened to Nehemiah. And so the book of Nehemiah is about rebuilding this city and restoring these people, but it's not just any city or any people. This is the city of Jerusalem, God's city, and the people of God. And so what's at stake in all of this is God's name being worshiped, God's word being cherished, the people of God who are meant to be the midwife for the Messiah to come and rescue not just their nation, but every nation. That's what's at stake, and it's a big deal. And so the book of Nehemiah, it's about the promises of God and the faithfulness of God to restore what has been broken. But then even more than that, the New Testament teaches us that we, the church, are the new Jerusalem. We're his new city. We're the people of God now. We are where God's word is cherished and God's name is known and Jesus is worshiped. Like we're that now. And so what we said last week is just the reason why this is incredibly relevant to us is just we recognize that in our own lives, in our own church, some of our walls have been broken down as well. That some of there's aspects of our life that we are in despair over, and there's destruction in our lives, and it needs to be rebuilt, and maybe Jesus will do that for us like he did in Nehemiah. And so last week, Nehemiah was broken over all of this, and he prayed a lot, right? He prayed a lot. This week, we're going to see him plan. Okay, you pray and you plan. You don't just pray and not plan. You don't just plan and not pray. You pray and plan. That's just good leadership. And so here's what I want to do this morning. This is like the third iteration of this sermon, and this is just where God led me. And so you're going to have to like email him, okay, if you don't like this. So god.gmail, I don't know what it is. So gals, I'm going to primarily apply this to the men this morning. Not at all that you are not necessary, needed, capable to plan and rebuild and be a part of the restoration of 100 things that need restoring. I've got 3 daughters in my house. I've got a wife. She's unbelievably competent and capable. She runs her own business, has her own studio. She would call herself a stay-at-home mom to our kids. She's there when the kids are there. She does ministry. She is unbelievably competent and capable. And yet, I want to help you by helping the men. I want to serve you by serving the men. And I think God told me to. And so, again, you'll have to just email him. Men have a ton of shame. A ton of shame. And most of the conversations I've had recently are with men struggling with all sorts of things. Their life, their marriage, their kids, their work, their money, their ministry. We don't know what we're doing. That's just kind of the insider tip. You don't know this. Maybe it's obvious to you. But we don't know what we're doing. There are a ton of voices out there right now, experts and podcasters and influencers trying to tell us what to do, and really what we just needed was a dad or a pastor or some brothers that could sharpen us and help us and walk with us and encourage us and show us what it looks like to be a man, to be better husbands and fathers and brothers and better at protecting and prioritizing the women that are in our life, and we just weren't shown that. most of our stories, that's just the reality. And so if you're a single dude planning on getting married and starting a family, you have to ask the questions that Nehemiah is asking. What is my plan? How is this going to happen? What am I going to do to be able to do this? What kind of man do I want to be? Do I have a vision for the kind of man I want to be and the kind of family that I want to have? The kind of ministry and work and the church that I want to be a part of? Do I have a vision for that? Do I have a plan to then accomplish that vision? What am I going to do with all of my college debt? What kind of ministry do I want to do? What will my family be about? What sort of values will we have? What am I going to do to start planning that right now? Pastor Nathan, he's a pastor of discipleship. Before he met his wife, before he knew his wife, before he met the woman that would be his wife, he had already started a journal that he would write to his future wife. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. This is what the Lord is doing. This is what I want to be about. This is what I want our family to be about. That's a stud. That's planning and praying and being ready, prepared for what God might call you to. If you're a husband, a father, do you have a plan for your family? You have lots of plans for your work. You write lots of one-pages. You have lots of spreadsheets. You are very smart. We're so glad how educated you are. But do you have a plan for your family? What schools are you going to send your kids to? What family discipleship? What will that look like? What will your involvement in the church look like? What will you do in the city? What does that look like for you in your home? What about your job, your money, your ministry? Do you have a plan for these things? We're called to pray and plan, to have a vision of what could be, what God might be calling us to, what should be in regards to our family, our church, our city, but do we have a plan to accomplish those things? Because what's at stake is the same thing that was at stake in Nehemiah. It's God's name being worshiped in the city. It's God's name being worshiped in your family. It's God's name being worshiped. It's the word of God being cherished in this church. You know how many downtown city urban churches started like ours did and then ended up throwing the Bible out? What's it going to take? It's going to take men and women fighting for that, saying in our home, we're going to cherish the word of God. Do you have a plan for that? Right? What kind of legacy are you building? What generational sins end with you? Will the name of Jesus be cherished on your campus? These are things that we are called to consider and think about and have a vision for, because the walls have been torn down around us and we are called to build them back up. Do we have a plan to do so? And so super practical, this is gonna be really practical. I have 9 points, okay? Not 3 points in a poem, you're gonna get your money's worth. I have 9 points. 9 points, that's how many points we need to learn as men. Are just real simple, 9 points about what it looks like to plan and lead out through this. And so first, in verse 1, chapter 2, verse 1, in the Nehemiah, this is mostly his journal, right, his personal journal, so he's telling us what's happening. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine, gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence, because you could die if you do that, okay? And the king said to him, "Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart." He says the month is Nisan. We know then that it's been 4 months since his brother visited him. So for 4 months, think about that, he's been broken for 4 months. I asked last week, when's the last time you've mourned and wept before God? When's the last time you've done that for 4 months? Like just been broken over something that's been broken. For 4 months, he's been broken over all of this, and he's been praying and fasting, and he can't shake this, right? It's not going away. This is not something he can just shake off. It's a sadness of heart. He's heartsick. And some of you do know that. Like there's some things that you just can't shake. Even if you see them for the 15th time and finally see that it's shattered and it's broken, there's a moment where God gives you eyes to see the condition of your life or of your marriage or of your family or of the people around, whatever it is, and you can't shake what you've seen. Like when the walls that were torn down in your childhood just have to be built back up because there's too much at stake. You just finally recognize that whatever was torn down has to be built back up if you're going to be able to move forward at all. Ronald Rolheiser, he said, whatever pain is not transformed is transferred. And you recognize that your pain has been transferred to your kids, and your pain has been transferred to the women that you love, and your pain has been transferred to the people around you. And so you've got to figure, you can't shake it, you got to figure something out. You got to build up those walls. When your marriage is just so broken to the point of desperation, you can't shake it. When what's happening in your home with your kids has to change. You don't know how you got there, but you're there, and so something has to change, and you can't shake it. When you have to start the ministry, because if you don't know who else will. You can't shake it. That's where Nehemiah is. He can't shake this. 4 months goes by, hasn't gone away. It hasn't gone away. And that's good, because here's my first point. You have to care. You have to care. Right? If you're trying to accomplish anything, if you want to get anything done, you have to care. And it seems so obvious. Of course we have to care, but so many men are numb and apathetic to the walls torn down in their lives, and they don't care. They don't care. They've numbed it too much. It's been too hard. It's gone on too long. They feel beat up and ashamed, and they don't feel like they have a fight in them. Dr. Anthony Bradley, he said toxic shame leads men to self-assess as pathetic, weak, worthless, stupid, cowardly, foolish, inadequate, insufficient, or never good enough. See, toxic masculinity isn't the problem, it's toxic shame. Toxic shame. If you're the enemy and you shame the hell out of men, and then you get them hooked on video games, porn, and Adderall, just as an example, you have won the war, because there's no fight in them left. There will be no fight in the men around you if they are covered in toxic shame. They won't have the strength to do it. They'll just think that they are worthless, weak, stupid, cowardly, inadequate, insufficient, and never good enough. And so what men do is we just numb it with Netflix. We start doubting and deconstructing our faith. We fall into that spiritual apathy that we talked about last week, and we just don't care. We won't care. It got heavy in here real quick. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. This should be a serious time. This is an opportunity for God to invite you into something that you weren't ready for. You thought you were just coming to church and you're going to meet with the living God. So how do you get men to care? How do you get men to care? You care for them. For the men and women in here, if there's a man around if there's a man around you that's passive and numb to the walls torn down in his life and all of that, if he doesn't care, care for him. Careless men are wounded men who weren't cared for. Jesus leads his church now with nail-scarred hands. Paul says in Galatians 6 that I bear in my body the marks of Jesus. The best leaders lead with a limp. They've been wounded, but they've been cared for. And they lead out of that humility. They lead out of that limp. And that's a powerful man who's been wounded but cared for, because now he wants to go care for the wounded. If you want men to care, you have to care for them. Men, what do? You have to realize that God cares for you. 1 Peter 5, obviously this is for men, women, children, everybody. This is a truth for everybody. But cast all of your cares on him, because he cares for you. God cares for you. God sees you. God knows what you've walked through. God is also grieved. And in your sadness of heart, you're actually connecting with the heart of God, who is also sad. Right? Did you know that? Do you know that God gets sad? God's not some stoic, distant referee blowing the whistle every time you screw it up. No, he actually cares for you. God, in Genesis 6, God is grieved over the corruption of the world. In Isaiah, the Messiah, Jesus, would be a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is like Nehemiah, weeping over the city of Jerusalem. Men, God cares for you. It grieves him that your dad sucked at being a dad. And it grieves him that you don't have the encouragement around you. And it grieves him that the enemy has won so many battles. And that grief doesn't paralyze God. It actually moves him to act in power in your life. His emotion towards you, his grief about your life, actually moves God to act. But you have to care. You also have to care. You have to seek the care of God, and then you have to care about the women and the men and the people around you. Right? Who else is going to fix your marriage? Who else is going to raise your kids? Right? Who else is going to help lead this church? Who else is going to restore the brokenness of our city? Nobody else can do that. You have been called here. You are called to do this. And so you have to care. That's one. Two, you have to pray. Look at verse 2. And the king said to me, I was very much afraid, okay? He says, I was very much afraid. Verse 3, I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city in the place of my father's graves lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Then the king said to me, what are you requesting? And so I prayed to the God of heaven. So Nehemiah is afraid because you don't come before the king sad. That's just not his role. That's not his role to be sad in front of the king. And he's nervous because the king asks him a question, and he's not paralyzed by that fear. He prays through it. He prayed in chapter 1. This is a different kind of prayer. This is a shotgun prayer. Okay, it's like a quick little, God help me. It's a pause. My wife's like, hey, pause prayer. If I'm, she's like, hey, you got to calm down. Okay, pause prayers. It's like just that quick prayer, shotgun prayer. It's a breath prayer. It's the quick prayer. It's not you on your knees praying for 30 minutes. This is just God help me prayer. But he's praying constantly. He's always praying. In fact, all throughout Nehemiah, we see a ton of his prayers recorded. He's always praying. He's always praying. Prayer is a constant resource for him that never runs out. You'll recognize as a leader, all sorts of resources run out. Money will run out. People will run out. Leaders will run out. Time will run out. Prayer never runs out. You'll always have an opportunity to go before God, the God of heaven, and pray. Right? You'll always have that. In one moment, he's in the throne room of the king, and in the very next moment, he's in the throne room of the King of Kings. That's what prayer is. It's a big deal. Leonard Ravenhall, he said, no man is greater than his prayer life. No man is greater than his prayer life. Later on in the book, he'll say, one place alone will keep the heart in passion, the eyes in vision, and that is the place of prayer. Right? So we have to be praying men. We have to pray over our family. Right? Not just with our wives, but over our wives. Not just with our children, but over our children. Right? We go on prayer walks. We come to the prayer meetings. We're praying on our knees. We're begging the Lord, pleading with the Lord in prayer. Spiritual warfare has to be fought with spiritual weapons, and prayer is the atomic bomb of spiritual warfare. And so we fight. We fight with prayer. 3, we have to be prepared and count the cost. Look at verse 5. We have to be prepared and count the cost. I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone, and when will you return? And so it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me to the governors, that they may let me pass through. I need a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest. I need some wood. Then he may give me some timber for the fortress and for the walls and for the house. And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my hand was upon him. You have to try to picture this. Okay, so the queen is sitting next to the king. He's at his vacation house in Susa. It's where he would winter. And you have to just kind of, like, this is an informal setting. Because the queen is next to him, the king is not sitting, like, doing king stuff, okay? He's chilling with his honey. He's asked the cupbearer to bring him some good wine. He's on vacation. He's done a lot of work. He's tired. And Nehemiah comes to him and asks him to reverse foreign policy, because he'd already said that the walls of Jerusalem couldn't be built back up, to give him a promotion to governor over Judea, to grant him a lot of PTO, and to give him a letter of recommendation. Right? So you have to try to picture this moment. Like he didn't know this moment. Nehemiah didn't know this moment was going to happen, but he was prepared for the moment. He was ready for the moment when it was time. He had been praying, mourning, asking God for help, thinking about these things. He had been consumed, right? Vision, what did we say last week? It's consumed with what is, but what should be. And so he had been consumed with that. And so in the moment where it was time to act, he was ready. He was prepared. And the king says, yes, yes, yes. You need a work visa? Got it. Supplies? Done. PTO? Sure. Right? So the king says yes, right? Nehemiah had a vision, he had prayer, but he also had a plan. Now, what many of us do, because we're Christians, we're very spiritual, is we'll have a vision for something, we will pray for something, but we will not plan for anything. Right? We just kind of expect God to just throw things into our lap. And he doesn't do that. He doesn't do that. No, we need an actual plan, right? Don't pray and not do anything. When you pray in faith, that means you'll act believing that God will answer that prayer, right? So you're the single dude that's still praying for a wife, but you have no plans. You have not asked anyone out. You have no plans to take them out. You don't know. I don't even know if I don't even know how it works. Do you ask them out? I don't even know how it works. When you do go out, she pays for half. I think that's weird. Call me old-fashioned. It just seems strange to me. Thank you. You're the marriage that's still struggling, but you have no plans to go to counseling. You have no plans to ask for help. You have no plans to do anything about it. You just talk about how you're struggling. Right? We need a plan. We have to pray and we have to plan, and then we can, keep. God changes our plan, then we have a new plan, but we pray and we plan. Are you prepared? Do you have a detailed plan for what you're going to do, for what God has set on your heart, where you're broken over? You can't wing it when it comes to important things. You can't wing it when it comes to a spiritual family. Like, how are you gonna do? You think this is gonna be easy? No, you can't wing it. You have to actually have a plan. How are you going to accomplish it? What sort of goals and benchmarks do you need to set so you can celebrate the progress along the way? What resources will you need? How much money? What things? What supplies? What books should you read? What people or leaders do you need to help lead you or follow you? Do you need accountability? Do you need somebody to disciple you? A mentor? Do you need an older couple to speak in? How is that going to work? Do you have a budget? Do you have a schedule? What opportunities do you need to pray for? What quality time do you need to get? Do you have to get away for the weekend with your honey, your queen? How does that work? What does that look like? Do you have a plan? Have you counted the costs? Do you know what it's going to cost you to build back the walls that have been torn down in your life? Nehemiah is going to give up a pretty good job, the comforts of the palace, the security of that job, and good wine, I guess. I don't know. He's giving up what he knows for this thing that he does not know. Right? He doesn't know exactly what is going to happen, but he's giving up a lot. And so what comforts will you need to give up? What time, energy, money will you have to sacrifice? What will your family have to stop doing to bring about the change that's necessary? If you prioritize now family or your kids or your marriage or whatever it is you're trying to work on, what do you have to deprioritize? What now becomes second seat in your life? Do you need to work less? Maybe even make less money? Crazy, huh? It's crazy. You might have to make less money. You might have to work less. Do the kids need to be in less activities? Maybe they don't need 6 sports and 4 camps a year. Maybe that's not actually good for them. Maybe they'll be okay if you do less. Single dudes, how are you going to pay off student loans? How do you get out of that debt? What do you have to sacrifice to get there? How does this work? You have to count the cost. You have to consider, what is this going to cost me to accomplish? Because this thing that I want to accomplish is more important than whatever I would give up. Because that becomes then the hard question, is this thing more important than what I'll have to give up? Because it's possible that I got to this point because I thought that other things were more valuable than this thing. And I've actually sacrificed them on the altar of my desires and my ambition and my kingdom. And that's why we're in this place. So we have to count the cost. 4, know your limitations. Look at verse 11. I really love this. I just love this. Verse 11, so I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. So Nehemiah finally gets to Jerusalem, okay? By the way, he's never been there. So he finally gets there, 4 months of weeping, praying, mourning, planning, however long the trip was to get there after he passed through all the forest and got all the wood and whatever he was doing. And so he finally gets to Jerusalem and does nothing for 3 days. What number am I on? 4, know your limitations. Know your limitations. The first thing that Nehemiah does when he gets to Jerusalem is he takes a nap. D.A. Carson famously said, sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap. And God's people said, amen. Right, he gets to Jerusalem, doesn't do anything. He just takes a nap. You have to know your limitations. You're human. You get tired. Jason Wilson dedicates his book, Cry Like a Man, to, quote, every man who is tired of not being able to say he is tired. I don't believe in a work-life balance. I don't think it exists. If it exists, it's like a 30-year-old single person in California working at a tech firm or something like that. You know, like there's no such thing as a work-life balance. You go to work, and then when you go home, there's more work, okay? You go to work, and then there's humans at home that need your care and presence, and there's a house that needs constant fixing, and there's bills that have to be paid, and there's chores to do, and there's things to clean, and you're always working. Work is work, right? It's from 6:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. working, okay? You don't want to work? Get up at 6, and wait till the kids go to bed at like 9:30, and then you've got like 30 minutes, and then you're not working for that much time. Right? It's all, there's no such thing as work-life balance. You work hard, sunrise, sunset, 6 days a week, and then you take your Sabbath. And if you don't take your Sabbath, then you're going to be in trouble. If you don't recognize your limitations, right? If you don't see that you are human and you can't do it all, then you end up giving, your high-octane fuel to probably your job and your vapors to your family. And then your walls start crumbling around you. Right? So we have to sit before God in those moments where we have a quiet moment. When we have a quiet moment, we have to be careful not to try to numb the pain or numb all that's broken around us, but we actually are filled up by the God of the universe who pours in that we can pour out. And so we Sabbath and we have silence and solitude. How wonderful is the weather. I can sit out on my porch and just be quiet for a moment. Just be quiet for a moment. We read our Bibles for a moment. We pray for a moment. We just take a breath for a moment. I don't know about you, but I get crabby easily. If I'm tired, I'm crabby. If I'm hungry, I'm crabby. If I'm stressed out, I get crabby. And when I'm crabby, I'm not present. I don't listen. I don't recognize what my kids need, the affections of, the bids for affection my wife is looking for. I don't recognize those kinds of things. And so we have to know our limitations. 5, verse 12, look at verse 12. Then I arose, after 3 days, he arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one in which I rode. And I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and the dung gate. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so verse 12, here's what he does. Notice that he doesn't tell anyone anything yet, but he's just got a few dudes with him. Okay, so here's number 5. Talk is cheap, but close friends are invaluable. He gets to work, only a few brothers with him, because he hadn't told anybody what he was doing yet. He didn't go on social media and start talking about this big thing he's about to do, and man, this is gonna be awesome. We're launching this new wall soon, and he's posting reels of the broken down wall with like sad music, and he hasn't said anything yet. Okay, he hasn't said anything yet. He doesn't make that mistake that a lot of visionaries and leaders do, where you get this vision, this idea, and you start telling everybody what you're going to do, and most often not actually do it. He's not going to overpromise and underdeliver. He's going to underpromise and overdeliver. Right? So some of you men, you do this. You hear this great sermon on a Sunday, maybe this Sunday even, and you go home and you're like, wife, this is what I'm gonna do, wife. I'm gonna change. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. Don't say anything. Don't say anything. You're not ready yet. Right? You're not ready yet. Some of you do that. You become the conductor of your own roller coaster spiritual life because you get fired up about Jesus through this one spiritual high, and you haven't counted the cost, you haven't prepared, you haven't prayed, you haven't planned. And you're not ready to talk yet because you're just going to be the guy that continually disappoints the people around you. And then you'll feel ashamed, and then the cycle will continue. Just shut up for a second. Gather some close brothers around you. Work that out together. Figure out what it's going to look like. How do I sustain this? How will I endure through the hard times? How do I get through this? This is not going to be easy to build this wall back up. Nehemiah doesn't go alone. Right? He doesn't do it by himself. He's got a few men with him. What shame does is it makes you go into hiding, and you don't want to try to do these things with other people. Right? So Adam and Eve was the first thing that they do. They realize they sin against God. They realize that they're naked, and they hide. That's what shame does. Shame is an attack on your very identity. It makes you feel exposed, and you want to try to hide. And the only thing that can cover up shame is grace. The only thing that covers up shame is grace, because grace re-identifies you. I'm a child of the Most High God. I'm a disciple of Jesus. I am a spirit-filled man or woman. I'm a child of the King, right? I mean, grace re-identifies us, rehumanizes us. But what we do is, in our shame, is we try to hide, and so we don't want to be exposed to other people. And yet that, again, recycles the shame, because you can't do this without other people. You can't do this without other people. Don't believe the lie that you're the only one struggling. Don't believe the lie that you're the only one walking through this, right? Marriage is struggling. Intimacy with your wife maybe is non-existent. Your parenting is a mess. You're in a bunch of debt. You're plagued by addiction, and no one knows. Somebody has to know. Somebody has to know. Some people talk on social media more than they talk with actual friends. That just seems really silly. That's a false sense of intimacy. That's a false sense of relationship and community. You need actual brothers and actual sisters to help walk with you through this. We have a tendency, I was talking with a friend last night, I just asked this question, like, hey, when you guys get together, what do you talk? Is there soul talk or just like, guy talk? Because I do that all the time. I'm a pastor, and I don't want to talk about hard things or real things, because then I feel like I'm on. I feel like I'm working. I feel like I'm working because I'm always working. But that's what real friendship is. That's what real relationship is, where we try to show our hand to one another and are vulnerable to one another, and we in a way invite other men to share with us what they are struggling with. You might be surprised of what your friends are capable of if you were to just be vulnerable and say, man, I need to let you know we're just struggling. You'd be surprised what spirit-filled men and women are capable of when you say, the walls are broken down in my life and I need help. 6, become an expert. Verse 13. I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and to the dung gate. Don't want to live there. I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by the fire. Verse 14, then I went on to the fountain gate, that's a good gate, to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. That's how bad the walls were torn down. His animal couldn't even get under. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall. That's the second time I used that word, that's my point. And then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned, and the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, and I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. So in verse 13 and verse 15, he uses this language of I inspected. Right? He's gathering information. He's gathering data. He goes out at night, so everything is quiet. Nobody knows. He's probably praying and taking notes, and he's taking in all of the brokenness around him, and he's very realistic about it, right? He recognizes how bad it is. He's not minimizing anything. He uses words like broken and destroyed. He's not downplaying the issue at all. He takes in all of the information, sees the severity of it, and recognizes he's becoming an expert at the problem. He's going to figure out what is the real problem so that I can come up with a real solution. You have to do the same thing. You have to be honest about your current state. Don't minimize it. Oh, it's not that bad. No, it is. Oh, it's not that serious. Yes, it is. Oh, no, it's bad. It's bad. And you have to not minimize how much it's going to cost. You have to not minimize how much time it's going to take. You have to not minimize how much sacrifice is required of you, the opposition that you're going to face. You have to gather all of that information, become an expert on what needs to happen. Leaders base decisions on information, and if you don't have the right information, you can't make the right decisions. And so you're going to need a PhD in your wife. The emotional inner life of your wife, you're going to have to learn and figure it out and seek it out, and it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time. There's a lot in there. There's a lot in there. You're going to have to search your kids' hearts. You know how hard it is to talk to your kid about their heart? They don't know. They don't know. They don't know what's happening. What's going on, baby? And what are you struggling with? Are you anxious about anything? It's like, what? I don't know. Candy. They don't know. You're gonna have to read the books, and you're gonna have to become an expert and listen to the podcasts, and you're gonna have to gather, get wise counsel, and you have to ask a ton of questions. But that seems like a ton of work, Pastor. Yes, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Right? Did you think marriage was gonna be easy? Did you think parenting was going to be easy? Did you think breaking generational patterns would be easy? Did you think getting out of debt would be easy? None of that is easy. Of course it's hard, right? And so you won't have much time for Netflix. You probably won't get better at your golf game, and you probably can't go hunting, much, because it takes too much time, and it's going to require so much of your time and work to build the walls that have been torn down around you. Is it worth it? Yes. The worship of God is at stake. Your family legacy, the spiritual legacy of your family is at stake. God's names on your children's lips is at stake. Is that not worth your work? Is that not worth your energy, your effort? You know how many young people, all the people, that we minister to in our redemption group ministries and counseling ministries, and when they come forward for prayer, do you know what we're doing? You know what we're ministering to? We're ministering to children of men who didn't think the work was important enough. Who said, you know what? It's not worth my sacrifice. It's not worth it. I care. It's not worth it. Screw that. We're dedicating 40 kids today, 40. That's a spiritual, weighty moment. And you have entered into a lifetime of wonderful work. Kingdom of God work. Man, the grace of God is so good. If you've screwed this up thus far, the grace of God is mighty and powerful. He restores and he rebuilds. But now you know. Now there's a responsibility because now you know. This thing takes work. You might not have time to go do those things that you love. You might have to wait. I went away. I have no idea how much time. I don't have time. I don't have time. 7. 7, lead with vision. Look at verse 17. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. And so they strengthened their hands for the good work. But he's leading with vision. He casts a vision to the people that are going to do this work. He's the husband has an Ephesians 5 vision of his marriage. Man, this marriage is for the glory of God, to be a witness of the gospel of Jesus Christ and his love for his bride, the church. He's got a vision, right? He recognizes that, man, my vision is that my kids would love Jesus and love his church and be resilient for when they grow up and there is that kind of pressure from the culture to no longer believe. I have a vision that my kids are strong enough to bear that up. Let's go. Right? He has a vision. They have a vision. Right? If we don't make a church priority now for our kids, why would we think that it's going to be a priority for them later? And so you have that vision, and you say, okay, so what do I have to do now so that they become this? Right? That it produces this kind of kid. How does that look like? What does that work? Child dedications are today. Here's what we were praying this morning. This is a weighty spiritual moment that's about to happen. Okay? It's a weighty spiritual moment that's about to happen. And so you have to lead with vision. And you have to think, what kind of family am I dedicating to the Lord? Like, what kind of family is this going to be? What am I doing? Am I just going through some sort of motions and the grandparents were able to come and it was just this kind of neat, sweet, cute thing that we can do? Or is this a sacred spiritual moment of kingdom implications? Do I have a vision of what that means? What does it mean after today, after I dedicate these kids? Do you have a vision to break generational sin? How many divorces have been in your family? Does that end with you? That's going to take a lot of work. Do you have a vision to break generational sin of anger, abuse, alcoholism, Does that end with you? Or is that going to be passed on to your children? Is the sacrifice that it will take so that it doesn't pass on to your children worth it to you? You have to have a vision. You have to recognize that your wife does not belong to you. Your kids do not belong to you. Your church does not belong to you. They belong to God. And so a man becomes really mighty when he has a vision, when he sees the mighty hand of God over all of those things that he's been given. You've been made a steward of God's stuff and God's people. And so when you see that, when you have a vision for what that looks like, that's when you become mighty. 8, 2 more. 8, expect opposition. So back in verse 9, then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river, gave them the king's letters. Then verse 10, but when Sandy, the Horonite, and Toby, the Ammonite, heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. They didn't like it. Sandy and Toby didn't like it. And then their dislike increases in verse 19 and 20. But when Sandy, the Horonite, Toby, the Ammonite, and even, Gary, the Arab, I grew up in Detroit. There's no Garys that were in Detroit. They jeered at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? There's going to be opposition. In fact, we're going to see increasing opposition as we go along in the story of Nehemiah. At first, they don't like the idea. Now they're mocking and despising and jeering at them. It continues to get worse and worse. But here's the point. You should expect to receive opposition. You should not expect the enemy to want you to do this. You should not expect for the people around you to all of a sudden just trust you. You should not expect all of a sudden just for it to work. And so here's my question. At the first sign of opposition, are you going to give up? If it gets hard, will you quit? Or will you decide now, it's going to get hard, I will not quit? There's going to be opposition. My wife and I, we had a vision for our marriage when we were getting married and when we got married. I forget exactly when we started talking like this. It was very, very early on. And I'm trying to remember the exact language. It was like, we do not want to be, it wasn't normal Christians. It was just, we're not going to do this thing, I can't say that word, half-hearted. We're not going to do this Christian thing half-hearted. Like we had no idea what we were signing up for when we said that. Like we had this vision that we were not going to do this thing, like this Christian thing, just going to go through the motions. And that was, we had no idea what that meant. That meant that God's grace had to tear us down before it built us back up. We had no idea. We had no idea how hard that was going to be. But we had this vision and we had opposition, and there was so many times where we wanted to give up. You have to decide now you're not going to give up. You're not going to give up. Right? You want to be a godly dude? You want to be a good husband? You're going to be mocked for it. Your friends will remind you of what you used to be. They'll think you're going to judge them because you're all now Jesus-y, and there's going to be opposition. You're going to want to do something in your neighborhood, and you're going to have this vision, but you're going to face indifference or closed doors. You're going to want to start a Bible study at work and see fellow workers meet Jesus and become Christians, but you're going to be despised for it. Your wife probably won't respond perfectly when you try to go rebuild the marriage because she's a sinner too, because you've hurt her, because you've torn the walls down in her life, and she maybe don't fully trust you to build them back up just yet. There's going to be opposition. Decide now that you won't give up. And then finally, look at verse 20. Actually, verse 8, second part of verse 8, and then verse 20. The second part of verse 8, the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. And then in verse 20, Sandy and Toby are yelling at Nehemiah. I love, what a great line. Then I replied to them, the God of heaven will make us prosper, and we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. I ain't listening to you. You have nothing to say here. You will not stop me. You will not slow us down. You have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. Here's the last one. God is your confidence. God is your confidence. God will make us prosper. Proverbs 21:1, the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. Artaxerxes didn't have a chance. Psalm 27:3, though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war arise against me, yet I will be confident. Sandy and Toby didn't have a chance. Proverbs 14:26, in the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have refuge. Right? So God is our confidence. Our confidence is in him, not in our abilities to build up the wall. No, we were part of tearing them down. God is our confidence. Nehemiah is going to succeed. God is going to win, and we are his legacy. We're the legacy of God's promises at work in Nehemiah. Because the walls were rebuilt, Jesus comes out of this people of God, saves the world, and here we are as a church talking about him, singing to him. We're the spiritual legacy of the confidence that Nehemiah had in God. And the enemy has no right or claim or portion in your life either. The enemy has no right, you have to say it, the enemy has no right or claim or portion in my life. The enemy has no right or claim or portion in my marriage. Today, the enemy has no right or claim or portion on my children. The enemy has no right or claim or portion, and God is my confidence. We have been purchased and ransomed by Christ. We're his. We're his. Our life is Christ. Our marriages point to Jesus. Our families point to Jesus. Our church points to Jesus. No, we're his. And so if God is for us, who can be against us? I mean, that's our confidence. Your confidence shouldn't be in you. If God is for us, who can be against us? Think about all the planning that God had to do to rescue you. Think about it, like the walls torn down in your life, your life just shattered. Think of the planning that went into God's rescue of you. Ephesians 1, before the foundations of the world, in love, he predestined you for adoption as sons. He planned, he predestined. Before things began, God's like, here's what I'm going to do. Right? Before sunsets, before flowers, before eclipses, before oceans, before brisket, praise be to God, before... I've always thought about it this way. It was like, you just kind of imagine, right, the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, and the Father like, Jesus, Spirit, come here. Hey, I've got this guy playing Jim. Man, I love him. He's my son. But he's gonna resist me and rebel against me and tear down the walls that I've built up to protect him. And so here's what we're gonna do. Right now, I'm predestining him, planning to rescue him from what I already know he's going to tear up. And Jesus, 2,000 years before he's born, I want you to die for him. Save him. And then Spirit, a little bit after he's born, probably age 11, 12, 13, I don't know, I wasn't Baptist, so I don't know an actual date. Baptists have dates, I have no, I was raised Lutheran, I don't know. Jesus just saved me at some point. Hey, Spirit, 11, 12, 13 years after Jim is born, I want you to explode into his heart the reality of what we've been planning today. That he's my son. And that Jesus, you're his Savior. And Spirit, you will walk with him every day, daily reminding him who he is. Romans 8, the Spirit of God testifies with our spirit that we are no longer slaves but sons. That we're heirs with Christ. And so here's my hope for you men, and then I'm done. The Father's plan was to rescue you. Jesus' work was to redeem you. And the Spirit's work right now is to restore you. You have not been left as orphans. Maybe your dad sucked, maybe he didn't, but you have a Father who knows and loves you. You're not a slave to fear, but you've been given the spirit of sonship. You've not been given a spirit of timidity, but of power. These are all yours in the gospel. You have been equipped with a spirit of self-control. You're not a slave to lust. You're not a slave to passions. You're not a slave to generational sin or generational patterns. You're not a slave to your insecurities. You're not a slave to what your wife might say or not say. But you've been given the spirit of power and sonship, and you're a man, the son of the Most High God. And you've been given a great, 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 great calling. What a great calling to build up the walls around you, to love the women around you, the children around you. God's equipped you to be able to do this. And so let me pray for you. Father, I pray for the men. I thank you for the women of this church and their understanding that this is necessary. And I pray for the men that they're careless because they haven't been cared for, that they would just experience your care now. They are not too manly to need the love of God. God, equip your men with strength. Equip them. We don't need another generation of broken men that break others because of it. We need a generation of men that knows the love of the Father, that rests in the work of the Son, and that is empowered by the work of the Spirit. So God, we just say, let it be.